everybody, and welcome to another Top 5 board gaming video. Today I'm going to be talking all about games that are other games in name only. Before I get started, if you haven't done so, please take a look at all my various social media pages as well as my Patreon page. On all of those, you'll be able to interact with myself as well as my channel in a whole bunch of really cool and very unique ways. Now, moving right into the video, I'm going to be talking about games that are other games in name only. What do I mean by that? Well, this means that you have a new game. It's not a second edition. It's not a different version. It's not really anything, but it shares the same name as some other game. And for me, it tends to be a little bit jarring. And I think some of these tend to be like sort of cash grabs. Others are like, well, it's similar enough to this theme that we can sort of tack on the original name, but the vast majority of these are going to be based off of the art and the overall thematic to them. So this is not necessarily a good or a bad video, I would say, as far as if these games are good or bad. I enjoy these games. I like all of them, but I think maybe they could have been better off on a new franchise or a new IP as opposed to sort of piggybacking off of one that already existed. But with that, you guys know I love hearing from you. What do you all think about this topic? It's pretty specific. It's kind of weird, so I'm really curious what you guys have to think about it. What do you think of when you see a game that's from another name, but it's a game that you really don't recognize or you barely recognize it or things of that nature? But with that, we're going to get started with my number 5. At number 5, I've got Seven Wonders Duel. More generally, this is all of these different Duel games, but particularly Seven Wonders, and then Tesla vs. Edison, and the Agricola Cave vs. Cave. With all of these, you can see the influence of the original game, whether it was Seven Wonders, TVE, or Agricola, but at the same time, the games do stand up on their own, and I love that fact. Seven Wonders in particular, I can really see the influence and the originality of Seven Wonders in the Duel edition, and it feels like a good two-player version of Seven Wonders. Whereas with Tesla vs. Edison and with Agricola, I find that it's more about the board and all that kind of thing. That's what's really important with those games. So having the Duel edition, I guess, makes sense, but at the same time, it's just kind of odd. It feels like something that's a little bit out of place, not completely, and that's why this is really low on the list. But it just sort of hits me the wrong way because I like this as a two-player version of Seven Wonders, but the other two, I don't really view them as two-player versions of their respective games. Not necessarily bad, but either way, Seven Wonders Duel and the other Duel games, my number 5. At number 4, I've got Thunderstone Advance. So obviously this is in name of Thunderstone. That was the original one. They're both fantasy-based deck builders. They have the same art. They do have the same designer, Mike Elliott, and most of these games have the same designers. But either way, the thing is that Thunderstone Advanced added so much to this game. It really, really did. We added experience, we added new boards, we added separate individual pieces, we added all sorts of different stuff. Whereas the original game was literally just a bunch of cards that you did deck building with. So this is a tremendous leap forward in terms of the gameplay. It's kind of like what King of New York did with King of Tokyo. They are separate games. They are similar, yes, but they are different, and one of them has a lot more strategy to it, which is what Thunderstone Advance really did. And so that's why I'm kind of sad that they didn't publish it under a unique, different thing, or at least have a slightly different name or something along those lines. But just adding Advance to it just made it a little bit confusing for me. But even so, it's still a good game, and you can still see the cards, the similarity with the art, especially all of that kind of stuff. Still here, still a solid game. Thunderstone Advance, my number 4. At number 3, I've got Manhattan Project Energy Empire. Similar to its predecessor, Energy Empire has a central board that has a bunch of different worker placement spots you can go to, and you're essentially trying to build up your own little thing. But in this case, you are generating electricity. You're also generating pollution that you're trying to clean up and build buildings and some of this other stuff. Whereas the original Manhattan Project, you were literally trying to build an atomic bomb. So the theming is pretty vastly different between these two. Whereas the artistic style and the general flow of the game is very similar. Again, you have the shared board with the workers, but you don't have like different types of workers like you do in the original Manhattan Project, all that kind of stuff. It feels like this is the first of the ones I've talked about. This is the first real departure from the style decisions of the original game, and that's sort of why it's higher on this list, is because Energy Empire really feels like it could have done with a different game entirely, or a different IP entirely. It's not bad, and I do like that they kept the art at least, so similar, but to me it's different enough that it's kind of a bit of a head scratcher. Manhattan Project Energy Empire, my number 3. At number 2, I've got Power Grid, The First Sparks. This is a game obviously based off of the original Power Grid generalized mechanics, but it is pretty different from the original one. In the original game, similarly to Manhattan Project Energy Empire, you were trying to power up buildings. You're trying to produce electricity for people to use for whatever they're doing. In this case, with the First Sparks, what you're doing is you are essentially in a hunter-gatherer society, and you have individual tiles that are coming out with different food sources. So, for example, instead of purchasing power plants, you purchase a fishing net, or you get spears so that you can hunt the mammoths and things along those lines. You can make fire so you can cook and those types of things. So again, you can see some of these connections. Again, the artistic style is there, and you are purchasing the nets and the spears and that kind of thing. But other than that, there's not a whole lot of similarity to the original Power Grid. And that's what kind of weirds me out with this. You've got a separate board, you do have resources that you're trying to get and purchase and grow and hunt and all that kind of thing, but it just feels way too different to me personally. I do like that really the only thing that connects it for me personally is the artistic style and the fact that you still have that auction mechanic where you're buying these individual things that you're able to utilize. But the fact that you have a board that's being built by the players as opposed to a like a map that everybody is going around and building on top of, it's different. It feels different, and I think that this should have been published under something else. But again, it's a great game. I really enjoy it. I just think that it could have done better as simply The First Sparks instead of Power Grid, The First Sparks. But with that, this game is my number 2. At number 1, I've got Pandemic Contagion. Pandemic is one of my favorite games. It is by far my favorite co-op, and Contagion completely takes the whole thing off the rails. With Contagion, instead of actively trying to stop a disease, you are playing as the disease. It's more of the Plague Incorporated version of Pandemic. Now, there is a Plague Inc. game already, and in this case, it's Pandemic Facade. Again, they are completely different. You're doing a completely opposite style of gameplay. At least in Pandemic the Cure, you're still trying to fix the diseases, but they did it in a boiled down way. With Pandemic Contagion, the goal of the game is completely inversed from the original. And not to mention, the art was done in a completely different way. Everything was different. It feels like a very different game, and I see no connection to the original Pandemic. I can only imagine that it was done not as a marketing gimmick, but as sort of like, oh, look, Pandemic. And I know Pandemic, it's something I'm familiar with, and that's sort of the only thing I can think of for the use of the name. But either way, it's an okay game, I guess. I kind of like it, but I just do not see why it's Pandemic. So that's why Pandemic Contagion is my number 1. Well, folks, that's it for me. I hope you enjoyed this video on my 5 I guess, least favorite or most obvious in-name only type of games. This is, again, kind of an odd category, and I'm really curious what you guys think about it. How far are you okay with people stretching it to say that a game is still in the name of something else? Again, these are not new additions, right? So for example, Cosmic Encounter has been made and remade, but the core of the game, the aspect of the game that makes it Cosmic Encounter, is still there. Same thing, like we've got, you know, A Study in Emerald, recent edition, Mansions of Madness, Twilight Imperium, all these kinds of things. You still see the original game in the new editions, but these are different games, they're different mechanics, they're new, unique things. Why is it that we're still calling them by these older ones? And so I'm really curious what you guys have to say. I'm curious what your opinions are and what your thoughts are on this. Do you think that it's okay to do? Do you not care? Do you not notice? Or is it something that irks you as well? I mean, for me, it doesn't bug me particularly too much, but at the same time, it is something that I notice, and then I'm like, why is this a pandemic game? It doesn't make any sense. So with that, I do hope that you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much as always for watching, and I will see you next time.